Hello everyone, it's Mr. Walker here, filming from my undisclosed location here at Pasco eSchool. And today we're going to be taking a look at a measurement and how we can relate measurement to what we've been learning about place value and also what we've been learning about powers of 10. So we're going to be looking at some customary measurements today, and specifically to measure length. So we're going to be looking at millimeters, centimeters, meters, all of those things, and how they can relate to not only what we know about place value, but what we know about the powers of 10 and using exponents and things like that. And before we get started, there's a couple things you guys are going to need. First of all, that blank place value chart is going to be very helpful. So if you have that, go ahead and get that out. And again, with that dry erase pocket or just something to write on, something to write with, because we're going to be practicing a few different examples, so be able to follow along with you. So make sure you have those things together, and then go ahead and click continue and we'll get started. All right, awesome. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to put up a place value chart, okay? So here's our place value chart, and I've labeled it from the tens place all the way down to the thousandths place, okay? So you guys should be able to do the same. So looking at this place value chart, what are some other ways that we can describe these numbers? Think in terms of like a unit measurement, okay? So for example, in the ones place, I could put a 1. In the tenths place, I could put 1/10. What are some other ways that we could label the other place value spots that are left? Go ahead and try that out real quick on your place value chart, and then we'll come back together and talk about it. All right, awesome. So in the 1/10ths place, I could put 1 over 10, the fraction of 1 over 10. In the hundredths place, I could put 1 out of 100, 1/100th, okay? And in the thousandths place, I could put 1 out of 1,000, 1,000th. So I have those things labeled up there. So now we're going to take a look at how that relates to measurement, okay? If we look at the ones place, that's where we're going to put our meter, okay? So that's kind of like the starting point, right? 1 meter, that's where we're going to take a look at today. And then everything else is going to be bigger or smaller than that. We're mainly going to focus on the smaller side of things today. So if meter is my 1 whole, okay? If I divided that meter up into tenths, that would be our decimeters, okay? Decimeters would be right there. That would be 1 meter divided up into tenths, okay? If we took that meter again and we divided it into hundredths, okay? So if we divided it into 100 pieces, that would make a centimeter, okay? So a centimeter would be the next measurement there. And then going down one further, if we took that 1 whole meter and we divided it up into thousandths, we would call that a millimeter, okay? So a millimeter would be equal to 1,000th, sorry about that, of a meter. So when we're looking at customary measurements like this, these meters we use to measure length, and we could use different measurements based on what we're measuring, okay? If I'm measuring something that's a meter long or longer, I could use the meter. If I'm measuring something really small, I can use the millimeter because that's only 1,000th of a meter, okay? So we're going to take a look at those things today, see how they relate, and see how we can convert from one to the other. Now, I was talking about all these measurements, and it might have been kind of hard to picture like a meter or centimeter or millimeter in your head. So let me grab my meter stick real quick so we can see what that actually looks like. All right, so I hold in my hands a meter stick, okay? And as much as I would like to pretend that this is some sort of lightsaber that I am battling around the galaxy in, it is not, okay? And I will not treat it as such. I will be nice and kind to it, especially since we don't have the rights to Star Wars CGI here. But anyway, this is our meter stick, okay? So if I take a look at this meter stick here, this is 1 meter. This is what we looked at on that chart, okay? 1 meter. And if I divided this into 10 pieces, okay, into tenths, that would be roughly, let's see, this size here between my fingers, okay? And that would be a decimeter. So one of these would be a decimeter, okay? If I divided them into 100, that would roughly be about this big here between fingers. We're talking like little pinch right there, and that would be a centimeter, okay? And then a millimeter is even smaller. I don't know if you guys could see, but there's these like little tiny tick marks right here. Each one of those would be a millimeter. So that would be 1,000th of a meter. So we could see we could take this whole meter and we could divide it into different sizes. So if I was going to measure like my height, I would use a whole meter because I could stack a couple of these up to figure out what my height is. If I was going to measure the length of a marker, I might use my decimeters because it's about, let's see, it's about 10 and a little bit more than 10, so I could use my decimeters. Centimeters I could use to measure maybe like my thumbnail or something like that, and millimeters I could use to measure like the size of a penny or the size of a thumbtack or something like that. So you can see we have these different measurements, we can use these different denotations of measurement to be able to tell the length of something. Right now we're just talking about length specifically with meters, okay? So I want you to think about this relationship here between these measurements. And again, we've kind of already said it, but how could you restate that? The relationship between meters, centimeters, decimeters, millimeters. How could you restate that relationship? What could you say? How could you describe like what they have in common, or how you move from one to another, or how you tell them apart? Give me a little bit of a sentence about how you would describe that relationship. All right, awesome. So what we could say is something like 1 millimeter is 1/1000th of a meter. Okay, 1 centimeter is 1/100th of a meter, and 1 decimeter is 1/10th of a meter. Okay, so that's how we can see that relationship and what they have in common. Okay, again, we're taking that meter and we're dividing it up into other pieces. Okay, we're going smaller on the place value chart. We're dividing by 10. All right, awesome. So let's take a look at how we can convert between units. So if somebody says I have 20 decimeters, I'll be able to tell how many centimeters that is. I'll be able to tell how many millimeters that is, basing my place value chart and how I can convert from one to another. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so let's take a look at a few things here and see if we can not only relate these measurements to what we know about place value, but also what we know about exponents. Okay, so I'm going to take my meter stick here and I'm going to actually draw a line that's about 2 meters long. We're going to have to pretend a little bit because my board's not quite big enough, but I want to draw a line that's 2 meters long, and then we're going to make some comparisons about it. Okay. All right, so here's my line. Not super straight, not super level. We're cool though, it still works. So we're gonna say from this end to this end, right? This is 2 meters. So this whole line right here measures 2 meters. So I'm gonna go ahead and write that here. I'm also gonna put it in my chart down there so I know that I have 2 meters, okay? So how many centimeters would that be? If we know that 1 meter is 100 centimeters, I have 2 meters here, so how many centimeters would that be? Right, if I have 101 centimeter, and then I have another 100 in my second centimeter, that would mean I have 200 centimeters. All right, awesome. So we're making some conversions. So we know if somebody says, oh, I have 2 meters of that, or if somebody says, I have 200 centimeters of that. It's the same thing, right? Just different ways of denoting that, different ways of saying 2 meters. So we're good there. So let's do this real quick. Let's think of a multiplication sentence using the number 2 that could help me get to 200. So 2 times what will give me 200? Just think about that for a second. 2 times what will get me to 200? Right. 2 times 100 will get me to 200, right? 2 times 100 is 200. So we can easily convert from meters to centimeters using that. Now, this 100 right here, using what we learned in previous lessons about exponents, how can I represent that 100 as an exponent? Instead of just writing 100, what exponent can I use to show the value of 100? Well, we know that 100 is the same as 10 times 10, right? 10 times 10. And 10 times 10 would be the same as 10 to the second power. So I could say 2 times 10 to the second power will give me 200, okay? So taking this for a second, let's say I had 1.37 meters. And let's say I wanted to convert those meters to centimeters. How could I do that? How could I figure out how many centimeters I have based on how many meters I have and based on what we've kind of done here? Think about that for a second. Talk about it with a partner or a learning guide, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it together. All right, so I have 1 and 37 hundredths meters, 1 and 0.37 meters. Okay, so on my 2 meters that I drew on the board here, I know it's going to be more than 1 meter, so it's going to be more than halfway. So let's say that this is 1 meter here, which might not be exact, but it's close enough. Right, so 1 and 37 hundredths is probably going to be, I don't know, let's say in here somewhere, 1 and 37, okay? So that's where my measurement would sit. So how could I take these meters and turn it into centimeters based on what we know on the line here and the strategies that we used here. Well, as we've seen, to get from 2 meters to centimeters, we multiplied by 100, or we multiplied by 10 to the second power. We could do either one of those. So if I take my 1/3700ths and I multiply it by 100, or I take my 1/3700ths and I multiply it by 10 to the second power, I will be able to convert that into centimeters. So we know on the place value chart, when we're multiplying by 100 or by 10 or by 1,000, we're going to move to the left, right? We're going to slide to the left, so that number is going to get bigger. And we can figure out how many times we have to slide based on the amount of zeros that we have on and what we're multiplying by. So here I have 2 zeros, which means that my number is going to slide, become bigger by 1, 2 spots. So this is going to be 137 centimeters. So 1.37 meters is equal to 137 centimeters, okay? Because I multiplied by 100 and I slid that number 2 spots to the left, which gave me 137. So all of those measurements are, again, different names, different denotations for the same thing. They all mean the same thing. Whether if I'm buying, let's say, Twizzlers by the meter, I can buy 1.37 meters, 1/3700th meters, or I can buy 137 meters, and I'm getting the same amount, okay? It's just different ways of denoting that, of showing it, all right? So cool. So we can kind of make a rule from going from meters to centimeters, right? If I was going to say, to convert from meters to centimeters, you would need to multiply by 100 or 10 to the second power, okay? So if I wanted to go from meters to centimeters, I'm going to need to multiply by 100, okay? So you got a little chart down here. You want to make sure you're filling that out somewhere. This would be a good thing to put in like your math glossary or in your math binder somewhere so you can refer to it, so you know how to make those conversions, okay? But you can multiply by 100 or by 10 to the second power, because 100 and 10 to the second power, they're the same thing. All right, cool. So that's a good example for that one. Let's try, let's look at one more real quick. Okay, so knowing what we know about how place value works and about these different measurements, our meters, our decimeters, centimeters, millimeters, if I wanted to convert now from meters to millimeters, how do you think I would go about doing that? Think about where millimeters are on the place value. Think about what they're related to, what their value is. How would we get from meters to millimeters? All right, well, if I multiplied by 100 to get to centimeters, to get to millimeters, which are 1,000th of a meter, I'm going to have to multiply by 1,000, okay? So let's look back at this guy. If I had 2 meters, right, we know that it's 200 centimeters. I just noticed a little bit of a mistake here. I got to take these meters out here, and I got to write in centimeters so I don't forget centimeters. Okay, so let's go back to this guy. Sorry about that. We have 2 meters, which is the same as 200 centimeters. Now I want to know how many millimeters is that? Would that be equal to? If I wanted to convert it now to millimeters, how would I do that? Well, when we wanted to convert to centimeters, we multiplied it by 100. So if I want to convert it to millimeters, what do you think I need to multiply by? Right, since millimeters are 1,000th of a meter, I would need to take those 2 meters, and I would need to multiply it by 1,000, or take those 2 meters and multiply it by 10 to the third power, okay? So if I were to do that, take that 2, I'm multiplying by 1,000, which has 1, 2, 3 zeros in it. So I'm going to need to slide this 2 to the left 3 times. So that would give me 2,000 millimeters. Okay? So 2 meters is the same as 200 centimeters, which is the same as 2,000 millimeters. So I can easily convert from one to another just by multiplying by 100 or multiplying by 1,000. Okay? What about this guy? 1 and 3700th meters, okay, which converted to 137 centimeters. How many millimeters is that going to be? Let's see. Using the same strategy as we used before, why don't you guys see if you could try it out, and then we'll compare what we have. All right, just like we did with our 2 meters, we're going to do the same thing and multiply by 1,000. Okay, so if I take my 1 and 3700ths and I multiply it, those meters, by 1,000, I am going to, again, move my decimal 1, 2, 3 spots because I'm shifting everything to the left, right? It's getting bigger. So this is going to be 1,370 because I'm going to have this kind of like blank spot here where that M is. When I move that decimal point, I'm going to have a blank spot, so I'm going to have to put a 0 in there to show that my number's gotten bigger. So that's going to be my answer, 1,370 millimeters. So 1,370 millimeters. Perfect. Okay. So what kind of rule could we write now for converting meters to millimeters? What kind of rule could we write to say this is what we could do every time to convert meters to millimeters? All right, well, to convert meters to millimeters, we're going to multiply by 1,000 or 10 to the third power because it's the same thing. So now we have some rules now for how to get from meters to centimeters and how to get from meters to millimeters, so we could definitely convert between one measurement and another. So I hope this is starting to make some sense. I hope you guys are kind of gelling with this a little bit. Let's see if we can maybe take a look at one more example together, and then I'll let you guys go and work on your own. All right, so in our example a second ago, we were looking at converting from meters to centimeters and millimeters, right? And even though our measurements were getting smaller, the amount that we had was getting bigger, right? And that's because when we're looking at this meter stick again, 1 meter is this whole stick, right? Our centimeters are these little pieces in between here, okay? So that's 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters. So they are actually smaller, right? It's a smaller piece, but that means I'm going to have more of them, okay? So that's the reason why we multiplied by 1,000 or we multiplied by 100, because we're actually going to have more pieces, okay? Even though the actual distance that we're using to measure is smaller, we're going to have more of them in order to get to that full meter or the 2 meters or the 1.37 meters, whatever it was that we're measuring. We're going to have more of those little pieces to make up that bigger measurement, okay? So let's take a look if we go the opposite way. Let's say that we start with something like 2 centimeters and we wanted to figure out how many meters that's going to be. Well, this time we're not going to have more of something, we're actually going to have less. We're going to be measuring in a bigger measurement unit, but that means we're going to have less of them, okay? So again, if I had 2 centimeters and I was going to use a whole meter stick to measure those 2 centimeters, it's not going to be 2, it's going to be smaller than 2 because I don't have as much of it that I'm measuring, okay? It's kind of a confusing concept, so if you guys are having any questions, comments, or concerns with this, reach out to me and let me know. Or reach out to a teacher, reach out to your learning guide, whoever, to help you out. But we're going to see now if we go from a smaller measurement to a bigger measurement, we're actually going to divide, okay? And those numbers that we're going to have are going to be a little bit smaller. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. Okay, so let's say that I had 2,000 millimeters. And I'm going to abbreviate with my 2 M's there because that's the same for millimeters, okay? That's the abbreviation there. So if I had 2,000 millimeters, I want to know how many meters is that equal to, okay? So let's think about this for a second. What do we know about millimeters and meters? What's the relationship there? Right, there's 1,000 millimeters in 1 meter, okay? So if I have 2,000 millimeters, well, I need to divide that into groups of 1,000 because that's going to tell me how many meters I have. So I'm actually going to divide that 2,000 into groups of 1,000, so 2,000 divided by 1,000, which will give me 2. So 2,000 millimeters is equal to 2 meters, okay? And again, we could represent this 1,000 as a 10 to the third, right? So we could say 2,000 divided by 10 to the third, which would equal 2. And then that's what we got there. So let's label this as like problem A for right now. So let's look over here. I got another one for you, problem B. What if I wanted to do 2,000 millimeters, and I wanted to know how many centimeters that was equal to? So 2,000 millimeters equals how many centimeters? What could I do based on my conversions that I did over here and based on what we know about place value and how these units relate? How could I convert 2,000 millimeters to centimeters? All right, again, we're going from a smaller unit here of millimeters to a bigger unit of centimeters, so I'm going to have to divide. So I'm going to take that 2,000 and I'm going to divide it by something. And I know that there are 100 millimeters in every centimeter, so I'm actually going to divide this into groups of 100, or I could say 2,000 divided by 10 to the second power, which would equal 200. So I know that there are 200 centimeters in 2,000 millimeters. So if I divided 2,000 millimeters, if I divided them up into centimeters, I would have 200. All right, we're going to take a look at one more example. We're going to switch over to another board so we can see what it looks like. And again, how we can use place value to convert between one unit of measurement and another. Okay, so this time we're going to be looking again at going from a bigger measurement of maybe meters to a smaller measurement of decimeters or centimeters or millimeters. Okay, so let's jump over there and take a look, and then I'll let you guys get to work.
Convert 37 centimeters to meters. Let me write this over. 37, and I'll write centi in a different color to emphasize the prefix. 37 centimeters, and we want to convert it to meters. So we really just have to remind ourselves what the prefix centi means. Centi literally means 1 over 100th or 1/100th of a meter. So this is really saying 3700th meters. So let's write it that way. This is literally 37 hundredths of a meter. So 1/100th meters. These are equivalent statements. So what are 37 hundredths of a meter? Well, that's going to be 37 hundredths of a meter. That's going to be 37 hundredths of a meter, which can be rewritten as, if you wanted to write it as a decimal, that's 0. You could view it as 3/10 and 7 hundredths, or 37 hundredths. So 0.37 meters. Another way that you could have thought about this is, look, I'm going to go from centimeters to meters. I have 100, I need 100 centimeters to get to 1 meter. So I'm going to have to divide by 100 in order to figure out how many meters I have. And you should always do a reality check. If I convert centimeters to meters, should I get a larger number or a smaller number? Well, however many centimeters I have, I'm going to have a fewer number of meters. Meters is a larger unit. So you should have a smaller value here, and it should be a smaller value by a factor of 100. So you literally could have started off with 37 centimeters. Let me write it this way, 37 centimeters. Actually, let's go through a couple of the units right over here. Now, if you wanted to turn it to decimeters, so this is 1 over 100. Decimeter is 1 over 1/10. So you would divide, this would be 3.7 decimeters. Let me write, this is 3.7 decimeters. And a decimeter is 1/10 of a meter. So you would divide by 10 again. So this is 0.37 meters. So one way to think about it is to go from centimeters to meters, you're going to divide by 100. Dividing by 100, you would move the decimal space over to the left 2 times. Doing it once divides by 10. Doing it twice divides by 100. So you get to 0.37 meters.